Understanding and Managing Emotions. Hi, I'm Bob Greaves, and this is another edition of Living with Wisdom. Now, the extent of research on human emotion in the last 50 years is truly amazing. Perhaps you had no idea, because academic journals and books containing the most significant insights tend to be distributed mostly in academic circles. Now, among these excellent resources, it can be difficult to find a comprehensive general overview of human emotion. Most of these resources focus on some subtopic of specific research, and last I checked, understanding and managing emotions is not a common area of study in high school or college, for your average student, in spite of how useful such information could be in helping us all live better. So, in this episode, I offer a very basic overview of understanding emotions. Now, the average person tends to embrace a wide variety of mistaken cultural notions about human emotion that they have never seriously examined for scientific accuracy. Consequently, most people unintentionally hold to many contradictory and unworkable ideas. We can do better, but to do better, we need to not only learn some new ideas, we also must confront some of these commonly held contradictory and unworkable ideas. But, that is not easy to do because common cultural assumptions are hard to prove wrong and often cause new insights to seem like nonsense. So, as we begin, let's get my most startling countercultural claim out of the way right away. What I'm about to say is very easy to misunderstand and sometimes hard to accept because it definitely runs counter to popular notions. So do your best to hear me out. You've heard it said that emotions are not reliable, but I'm going to disagree, and I can explain why. I say emotions are completely reliable, perhaps more reliable than any other conscious experience you or I are capable of having. And so, if my seemingly outlandish claim is correct, the common view that emotions are unreliable has the potential of resulting in very serious mistakes in our desire to understand ourselves, our conscious emotional experience, and in our making of appropriate decisions. Furthermore, I claim the reason emotions have a reputation for being unreliable is not because they are unreliable, but because we have been wrongly taught by our culture to rely on our emotions for something our emotions do not even do. We've been taught that emotions respond to reality, to stimulus. But to be more precise, we've been wrongly taught that emotions are inept reality detectors. Now, if you think that emotions respond to reality, it is not surprising that you think of them as unreliable. We all know it is undeniable that how we feel about things and what is really true about things are often way out of sync. The best way to destroy the reliability of a truly reliable dynamic is to convince yourself you can rely on it for things it does not do. Here's an analogy. If you go to your dentist for financial advice, you might get good or bad advice. But if the financial advice you get from your dentist is bad, that does not necessarily mean your dentist is an inept dentist. Well, so too, if you expect emotions to clue you in about reality, you are in for a huge disappointment and many regretful judgments. You might even hold it against your emotions for being so inept. But emotions do not focus on reality. Stop depending on them to do that. Emotions pay attention to you. They pay attention to and respond to what you have been and are doing with reality. So yes, they are related to reality in an indirect way. But emotions do not care what is true about reality. What they care about is what you have been doing with reality. And if what you have been doing with reality is erroneous, your emotions will make your deepest emotional responses consistent with your erroneous notions of reality. Let me say that again in several ways to drive this point home. Our emotions, among other things, based on our personal history, reliably tell us what we have conditioned ourselves to assume about reality. If we have formed very inaccurate ideas about objects currently within our awareness as to their purpose, meaning, and value, our emotions remain absolutely loyal to our mistaken notions. You can count on it. Emotions are completely reliable for that. For example, if you had the experience while growing up of constantly being lied to by a few relatives who had big noses, then later in life, as someone with a big nose says something that strains your sense of credibility, you might strongly feel as though you're being lied to. Perhaps later you discover your recent encounter with the person with a big nose was telling you the truth. Well, why did you so strongly feel lied to when, as it turns out, they were telling you the truth? Is it because emotions are unreliable? No. This is because when you feel that you are being lied to, that does not mean you are being lied to. But it does mean that there is something in the context of that moment that you consciously or unconsciously have come to associate with being lied to. Your emotions are simply alerting you to the fact that you have beliefs formed in your past that are somehow emotionally triggered in the current context. You can count on it. So perhaps this begs the question, just how are your emotions precipitated and how should you interpret their meaning? If your emotions are fully reliable, as I claim, for what they actually do, well, exactly what then are they doing? The answer is not simple because your emotions are sensations that emerge at the end of a long chain of several previous events. What if a police officer flags me down on the highway with his lights, and so I pull over? I open my window as the officer approaches, and the officer says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And I say, "Sorry, officer, I have no idea. Why did you pull me over?" So the officer asks to see my license and registration and continues the conversation, saying, "I clocked you going 85 miles per hour in a 55 zone." Now, let's pretend that I am a very naive person, not very bright, and I'm not an experienced driver. So I honestly respond by saying, "Officer, I'm pretty sure that the speed limit here was 85. Now the officer notes my demeanor and realizes I honestly meant that. And so, quite startled, he asks, "You believe the speed limit along this stretch is 85? And he looks at me in disbelief. And so I respond in all honesty, "I had my eye on the speedometer, and it is a digital speedometer. You know, those things are very accurate. And it said 85, which, as you say, is what I was doing. So what's the problem?" So the officer looks at me puzzled for a moment. And so I continue in my defense. I don't know what to tell you, officer. My speedometer said 85. The officer suddenly realizes that for some crazy reason, I think the speedometer tells me how fast I'm allowed to go, not how fast I am going. My speeding was not because I disregard the law, but rather because I misunderstood what speedometers tell me. So I ask you, how can I rely on a speedometer when I am completely mistaken about what speedometers are telling me? I can't. Speedometers are only reliable for what they actually do. Well, this is how it is with emotions. Emotions are not telling you about reality. They never do. They are reflecting back to you a summary of your acquired understanding from the past or as the case may be, your misunderstanding of the significance you are imposing upon something in your current experience. So, if you have a significant misunderstanding of some aspect of your current awareness, your emotions will remain totally consistent with that misunderstanding. Now, sometimes correcting a misunderstanding can take time to reset emotions. When emotions are intense, but you realize you misunderstood the moment, your feelings may still take considerable time coming around to the new reality. Back in 1982, I was reading in my home when I heard a loud bang coming from outside. My heart sank because it sounded like a gun. I carefully approached my window to peek out, and sure enough, there was a man lying on the street right in front of my house, next to a truck with the engine hood open, and he seemed barely conscious and writhing in pain. And there were also a number of people running away from him as fast as they could go. I quickly backed away from the window. My goodness, a man has just been shot right in front of my house. I called the police right away, and I told the desk sergeant, I think someone has just been shot in front of my house. And this desk sergeant calmly asks me, what makes you think someone has just been shot in front of your house? So I tell him what I saw. Several police cars show up within a minute. As it turns out, it took 20 minutes before the police knocked on my door and told me the story. This man was using a cigarette lighter to check the level of his truck battery, and the battery exploded in his face, knocking him unconscious to the ground. The reason why everyone else was running away was because, well, they had some battery acid on them and they were running to find water. Now that I knew the truth, I was greatly relieved. Nonetheless, I found that for the next several days, I was still recovering from the stunning emotional thought that a man had been shot right in front of my house. It made no difference that my initial emotions were based on a total misinterpretation. Those emotions were strong, they were troubling, and I had to go through the process of working them through, even though they were provoked during a complete misunderstanding. It affected me emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And it took me several days to readjust. If we are ever traumatized by a misunderstanding, when we come to discover the truth later, be it moments or possibly even years, we might make the mistake of forbidding ourselves to go through the process. But emotions do not care about reality because they are responding to your understanding, or as I said before, your misunderstanding. And very intense emotions require a process they must work through regardless of reality and regardless of how your understanding of reality might change during that process. Once emotions have been evoked, they are what they are, and they set in motion a process required to embrace and process them as you return to equilibrium. So, if emotions are at the end of a long chain of previous states of mind, what then are the original links to that chain? Well, there are basically 4 dynamics responsible for precipitating the emotions we experience. They work simultaneously, and they are always ongoing, creating the complex mixture of emotions we experience at any moment in time. And yes, every moment in time is filled with a conscious broth, as it were, made up of many emotional flavors, some very dominant, some very subtle, and everything in between. So, the first dynamic I will mention is your semiotic history. Semiotic history? What does that mean? Well, that is your history of making sense of the things you observe and the process you go through assigning a meaning, a purpose, and a value to them. As we grow from infancy, we notice all kinds of things. We notice concepts, we notice patterns of behavior, we notice sequences, we notice people, places, and things, and we categorize all this into familiar objects of organized thought. But notice, we do far more than simply notice such things. The human brain is busy unconsciously processing objects of thought, organizing them into categories, and semiotically assigning a relative meaning, a purpose, and value to them. As an example, I will use an object we have all observed that is, for most of us, a rather neutral object. A Sharpie. I use lots of them in numerous colors in my office to mark things. You have no doubt seen them, and so you probably know what a Sharpie is. But you and I know more than just what a Sharpie is. If we've used them, we have made many general observations. They come in different tip sizes, different colors. They can run out of fluid or dry out if you leave the cap off. They appear to be about 5 inches and in length, and I have seen them in slightly different thicknesses. I've also observed other people using them, or preferring certain colors. And I have gained an impression of what these people think about Sharpies, and their attitudes might have influenced my attitude about Sharpies in sympathy or possibly opposition to their attitude. I have also observed how Sharpies can make a difference. Marks they make do not easily come off. They can ruin a shirt or send an effective, bold message that influences someone. Now, hopefully using a Sharpie as an example is rather humdrum. But if you have ever been attacked with a Sharpie, then a Sharpie for you is no longer a humdrum object. And the reason is because as our brains categorize the world into recognizable and manageable objects of thought, as I said earlier, we also attach a meaning, a purpose, and a value to every object of thought based on general observations, based on the influence of other people, and based on the before versus after changes various objects seem to be able to bring about. These judgments become stored in our brains with the potential to be recalled, but not just as a paragraph of information, but also as an emotional sensation related to the meaning, purpose, and value we have assigned to that object. And that emotional sensation will be consistent to our understanding or misunderstanding of that object. You can count on it. This is very reliable. Assigning meaning, purpose, and value to any object of thought is to turn that object into a symbol, or as some professionals might call it, a signifier. All human brains do this. You cannot think coherently about things without doing it. However, once that meaning, purpose, and value has been attached to the thought object through our experience, any time thereafter that object comes back into our conscious or unconscious focus, it has the potential to trigger the emotions that summarize the meaning, purpose, and value we attached to it. This is the semiotic process. So, one of the 4 foundational causes of emotion is our semiotic brain that attaches meaning, purpose, and value to every object of thought we ever deal with. And that significance can range from humdrum to intense or anywhere in between. And since we all have a different history, objects of thought have the capacity to trigger very different emotions in different people. Now, after semiotic history, we now move to our state of health as another foundation giving rise to emotional experiences. How healthy or ill you might be at any given moment can inhibit or facilitate the efficient emergence of certain emotions. Hearing good news while experiencing a powerful migraine can dampen your joy. And if you just finished running 5 miles and you're full of endorphins, and then you hear someone telling you very bad news, the sadness might not sink in fully until the endorphins have abated. This foundation to emotional response is not difficult to understand, so we do not need to belabor it. We've all noticed how our usual emotional responses can be different when we physically feel different. Most of us have seen how our current state of health modifies the emotional responses we are likely to have to various circumstances that come about. Now, a third foundation of emotion we need to talk about is cognitive capacity. What do I mean by this? No one can have feelings about things they are oblivious to. And it makes no difference if the reason you are oblivious is because you have not yet noticed something, or if noticing something is, for whatever reason, completely beyond your abilities. Now, as a musician, when I hear someone singing out of tune, it is irksome to me if it is not being used expressively. And studies show that different people have a different sensitivity for being aware of when something is out of tune. Now, the point is this. When someone is singing only slightly out of tune, you might not notice it while I am gritting my teeth. You could be enjoying the performance while I am wishing Simon Cowell could come along and comment. We will feel differently about the singing because, well, our cognitive capacity to be aware of what is out of tune is different. Anything you can be aware of is something you will attach some meaning, purpose, and value to. Now, there are also many reasons why our cognitive capacity can differ. Personal aptitudes are different. Some people are very good at math, while others get confused by calculus or complex statistics. Furthermore, cognitive ability develops and changes from cradle to grave. Children have more brain power dedicated to language acquisition than do adults. People with Asperger's often lack certain social skills, not because they do not care, but there's just something about the social signals most of us pick up on that they are either oblivious to or have genuine trouble understanding why we assign the social value we do to that behavior. So, cognitive capacity sets limits on just what objects of thought can be organized within our history and thereby acquire semiotic meaning, purpose, and value. You cannot have emotions based on things you cannot be aware of, and you cannot avoid having feelings about objects of thought you do take note of, even if it's a rather blasé emotional attitude. Now, the last of the four foundational dynamics is focus. There are things that you or I are paying attention to right now, and things that are far from our central thoughts, but it is more complex than just that. We are also unconsciously aware of several things, paying attention to numerous sensory experiences, for example, even when they might not have our full attention. So our focus includes several things that are also in our periphery. For example, you can be in a classroom, deeply attentive to a lecture while apparently oblivious to the chatter going on in the hallway just outside. However, if someone in that outside chatter, even from a considerable distance, were to be yelling, "Fire!" you would most likely immediately shift your central focus to assess the potential danger. Our brains have a wonderful way of paying attention to things we want to pay attention to while also monitoring unconsciously things that we keep out of our central focus. But those blurry experiences can be brought into our main view when truly important, because at a low level we are still paying some attention to things entering our sensory perception. All the things currently bombarding your brain consciously and unconsciously provoke a recollection process of what meaning, purpose, and values you have previously assigned to them. That meaning, purpose, and value is recalled as an emotion to the degree that the object of thought is towards the center of your focus, possibly even to the degree that it is significant. So far, now, we've only covered a few basics. It is more complex than this, but this is the simple overview of the dynamics that eventually trigger your current emotional state. These four dynamics are continually active, and in review they are: 1. Your semiotic history with recognizable objects of thought, how you have stored their meaning, purpose, and value in your brain. 2. Your state of health will open and close certain emotional possibilities of intensity concerning just what emotions you are currently capable of experiencing. 3, your cognitive capacity determines just what is and is not capable of being an object of thought for you. And 4, your current focus of mind determines just what emotions, based on the other 3 foundational dynamics, are being activated at the moment. These 4 dynamics are totally involuntary. Sure, you can manage them and improve how they function, but you cannot choose to be exempt from their operation. Now, as we learn to understand what our emotions are reliably telling us, and as we learn to manage how we will then deal with them appropriately, it is important that we avoid misunderstandings or strategies that amount to denials of these 4 foundational dynamics. It is also important that we stop relying on emotions to tell us things they are not saying. For example, stop relying on emotions to tell you what is really going on around you. Here are a few ideas about how we can manage our emotional experience. If you were subject to a very traumatic event at the age of 7 that remains unresolved at the age of 45, it is quite possible that the event itself is one that at age 45 strikes you as unremarkable, but which when you were 7 was highly significant. You might never be able to resolve the emotions that event continues to trigger because the resolution requires you to understand the event as a 7-year-old, not as someone who is 45. The unresolved emotions are stuck in the semiotic meanings, purposes, and values present at the time of the stagnating event. So, the advice of, just get over it. You're being silly. You're an adult now. It might make sense to you, but it does not work because that is not how emotional resolution of childhood trauma happens. Your inner child needs respect, acceptance, and empathy, and cannot move past its issues until it is loved and finds it is safe to move forward. So let's discuss a few more useful managing strategies that we have time for. The first thing every emotion demands of you, yes, I said demands of you, is that you embrace and feel whatever it is that you feel. There is never an emotion you should avoid having. It will always be counterproductive for you to repress feelings that are uncomfortable, negative, difficult to understand, or contrary to your current understanding of reality. And it will almost always be counterproductive for you to vent your feelings. Indulging for years in such maladaptive responses might require a therapist to help you unravel the resulting mess, but the more you allow yourself to fully feel whatever it is that you do feel, the more comfortable you can become in allowing yourself to embrace all your emotions. And the more you are faithful in fully feeling what you do feel, the more you will discover that most of your emotions require nothing more than to have you simply own them, embrace them as yours, and feel them completely. Some emotions are uncomfortable, but all of them are precious and necessary. You must own whatever you feel as being exactly what it is that you do feel. The fact that your emotions might not make sense to you is irrelevant. You still must feel them. If you are a human being, you are basically incapable of having feelings that mean nothing. They mean something even if you have no clue what that might be. They mean something even if it comes from the past that is contrary to what you now understand. They mean something even when you do not like feeling this way. Truth is, stuffing your emotions or lashing out with an emotional outburst, those are both maladaptive strategies for avoiding feeling and embracing your emotions. Embracing your emotions requires that you face them squarely until you can do so with full acceptance and without hesitation. Remember I said that your emotions are actually at the end of a complex chain? By the time you are having an emotion, it is already way too late to do anything about having it. You would not try to stop a stick of dynamite from exploding by squeezing it hard in your hand. Once the fuse has been lit, you will lose your hand. And trying to not feel what you are feeling is going to result in you losing you. It is denying your history. It is denying your state of health. It is denying your cognitive capacity. And it is denying your focus. That's not psychologically healthy. It is maladaptive to seek to avoid ever feeling whatever emotions are rising to the surface at any moment, for any reason. But this reminds me of the parenthesis tactic. It can be risky at times to wear certain emotions on your sleeve. Transparency is not always wise. And sometimes, in an emergency, there are things that must be done, but strong emotions can get in the way. At such times, you can use what I call the parenthesis tactic, where you promise yourself you will move on unemotionally for the moment, but you will get back to your feelings at a more opportune time. I must warn you, this tactic does not work for people who do not keep their appointments with themselves. If you repeatedly say to yourself, I cannot indulge myself in this feeling right now, so I will do that later, but you often fail to get back to yourself later. After a while, your emotions refuse to cooperate. You might then resort to either stuffing or venting. But if you faithfully take the time, in private or in safe company, to truly reconnect with all the emotions you temporarily placed in a parenthesis, you can actually get very adept at putting certain feelings off till later when that is advisable. Sometimes your initial emotional response is based on a misunderstanding of a situation that requires a mature response. Yeah, we know that happens. By developing the faithful habit during an indelicate moment of deferring your emotions to an appointment you keep later, it gives you time to reassess and arrive at a far more productive response. Note, however, you still have to take the time to feel the emotions based on your initial misunderstanding, or this tactic will stop working as effectively. Now, this is a promise you make to yourself, and one that you must always honor. I'll never forget sitting on a bench downtown on a pleasant Sunday morning way back in 1980. A number of pedestrians were on their way to one of 3 churches close by when an elderly woman started crossing the street while the light was still green and was immediately struck by a passing vehicle. I was less than 60 feet away. I ran to the scene. Bystanders were shocked and immobilized, and I immediately looked around to assess who was there and to figure out, what actions we might all take. I asked one young man to stand in the street to stop cars that might not see the woman still lying in the road. I urged another to not move the woman in case her neck was badly injured, but to reassure her that we were helping her. We were only 4 blocks from a police station, so I asked another bystander to alert the police. And I noticed a teenager on his bicycle, and I asked him to quickly ride his bicycle around the corner where there was an emergency room and have them call an ambulance. And lastly, I asked someone to keep the driver of the vehicle from wandering out into the road. The driver was a teenager, deeply upset, and meandering obliviously into oncoming traffic, muttering, "Oh my God, I just hit a lady." Now, I was clear-headed and not at all emotional. I took charge of the situation until the police arrived. Later, when alone, I sat down and I let myself feel the shock and the distress of having seen what I just saw. My ability to put my emotions into a parenthesis and faithfully get back to them was what helped me to have the clarity to act decisively during that dreadful event. By the way, I visited that elderly woman in the hospital a few times, and fortunately she made a full recovery. Now, I should mention that this parenthesis tactic is easier for some of us, but many people have discovered they get better at it if they keep their appointments. Now, when it comes to understanding what emotions are telling you, that too is part of managing them. Understanding requires that upon feeling what you feel, you give yourself time to understand, if possible, what your feelings tell you. Exactly what is it that you can completely rely on your emotions to tell you? Well, remember what I said near the beginning. Your emotions are not telling you about reality, so don't go there. What they are telling you is what meaning, purpose, and value you have attached in the past to the objects of thought currently within your focus. Understood in this way, emotions never lie. Even if you are not yet clear on what they are trying to tell you, you are feeling whatever you are feeling for reasons, and those reasons are established somewhere in all four of the initial dynamics we discussed earlier. Whatever you are feeling tells you that there is something in your current focus, that in the past you have attached a meaning, purpose, and value to it, and that you actually, at some level, deep down inside, still believe it. However, take note that these beliefs and the meanings, purposes, and values are conclusions you came to back when you were younger and perhaps not as aware or as wise as you are today. You might superficially believe something very different now, but if you have not yet come to terms with the emotions of the past, those emotions will still be triggered based on your ancient beliefs, meanings, purposes, and values. So, when you discover that your emotions are truly out of sync with reality, this is your way of knowing that you still have some unfinished work to do in resolving or dissolving significant events from your past that you probably have been avoiding. Perhaps it did not seem important at the time, and maybe it was a minor thing. But this is a big reason why it is important that you always remain in touch with and embrace whatever it is you are feeling. And this is also why it is important to take care of loose ends. Feeling those feelings and understanding how they made sense back in the day is an essential part of moving forward. In such cases, it is possible that your history includes up to a dozen moments that confirmed an inaccurate attachment to something semiotic. It might be necessary for you to revisit and reevaluate several events in your past in order to reorganize a new emotional attachment. This not only changes how you feel right now, it also changes how you feel about those past events. My father was particularly critical. Growing up for me was very painful in that regard. As a child, I thought he knew everything, and I thought all of his criticisms were absolutely accurate. I embraced the notion that I was inadequate to life. I was an idiot, and his constant criticisms implied that. Now, as an adult, I finally was able to look back at those criticisms. I relived the pain. I felt the embarrassment, but also more clearly, I saw that he was the one having issues and that the only thing I was guilty of was being a child. Now, fully embracing that pain, that shame, and that embarrassment while recalling several childhood moments as an adult was for me deeply healing and brought an end to my constantly feeling inadequate around authority figures. My emotions were trying to tell me that issues from the past were similar to objects of thought currently in my life, and that I had some work to do to resolve and dissolve those issues. Yes, I felt inadequate, but my feelings were not telling me that I actually was inadequate. No, my feelings were reliably telling me that I had long ago come to the conclusion that I actually was inadequate. My identity was one of those objects of thought to which I had attached that particular meaning, purpose, and value. So I say again that emotions are honest and completely reliable once you understand what it is you can rely on them for. Now, perhaps you find yourself unusually irritable. As you stop to think about it, maybe you realize you are overworked, perhaps stressed about a few things, perhaps overtired or hungry. Depending on what you are going through, you might not be able to take a break, but you can at least cut yourself some slack in not judging yourself too harshly. Perhaps your irritability is trying to tell you something about your current state of health, and if you ask me, you best listen. The message in your irritability is a precious one and reliable. Sometimes we can be depressed because things, as best as we understand them, seem hopeless. Now, others might be trying to tell you how things can be different. Some of them are telling you that only in hope it will make you feel better, and that can help to a small degree. But it is also possible that the solution to your predicament is something you do not as yet understand. Consequently, since the solution is something you do not currently understand, it is beyond your capacity to see the hope. Your emotions are not telling you that all is lost. They're not telling you that it is a truly hopeless situation. That's not what depression means. Rather, your feelings are trying to tell you that based on your current understanding, this is definitely how you see it at some level deep down inside. You need to own that this is your perspective. Now, this might sound strange at first, but when this is how you see it, you are supposed to be depressed. Any other emotion is truly out of touch with where you currently see yourself. It can be helpful to remind yourself that your depression is not telling you that it is a hopeless situation. Rather, your depression is reliably telling you that this is how you are currently seeing it. Maybe you need to reassess how you make sense of things. Maybe you need to change your focus, pay attention to some other things. Maybe you are stuck in an underdeveloped or misinformed thought habit. How can you change an unworkable mindset if you won't face the truth that this is your mindset? And why should you feel any different than how you feel? So if you feel depressed, that is your emotions telling you that you are currently seeing things as hopeless. And this never means that they are. Did you know that seeing things as hopeless for some people is a way of avoiding an unpleasant task? Perhaps you need to find an authentic way to see things differently. And when you do see things differently, you will definitely feel better and do something new. Sometimes our habits of focus are in a narrow rut. We get into the habit of turning our deliberate focus towards the exact same narrowed set of facts, while ignoring other relevant and available facts that escape our notice. But the facts you ignore, if paid attention to, would help you assess the current situation in a manner that is significantly more accurate. Optimists and pessimists both presume they're merely realists. But we are all alike in this respect. None of us always see the whole picture. We can easily stick to maladaptive habits of focus to decide what selected facts fit our habitual themes, as if those are the only thoughts relevant in any given moment. But if the only objects of thought you allow yourself to focus upon are that reduced thematic set, it is no surprise that your emotions reflect the feelings that are limited to what you allow yourself to pay attention to. If you are only looking at the bad news, it is no surprise that you feel awful. Or if you are only looking at the good news, it is no surprise that you are blissfully moving towards potential disaster. Your feelings are not telling you that all is well or that all is lost or whatever it is that is going on at the moment. Your emotions are trying to tell you what, of all the things going on in the moment, you have chosen to limit yourself to focus upon. Sometimes the message from your emotions clarifies your counterproductive, narrow attention habits. Again, I say, emotions are never trying to tell you what is going on in reality. They are reliably reflecting back to you, in the language of emotions, a summary of the meaning, purpose, and value you have been attaching to the objects of thought in your version of reality. Emotions are an advanced personal course in being honest with yourself about your historical reality assessments. Well, this is just a start. There is so much more to learn about human emotion, but if you can grasp the significance of what I have already covered, I feel confident that your emotional well-being will blossom, and that given sufficient experience and careful thought, you will be able to figure out much of what your reliable emotions are telling you. I believe in you. I believe in your emotions. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Greaves.